What does it mean for a country to measure itself not by what it earns, but by how content its people feel? Bhutan is a kingdom of roughly 780,000 people, wedged into the folds of the Eastern Himalayas, landlocked between the Tibetan Plateau of China to the north and the Indian states of Sikkim, West Bengal, Assam, and Arunachal Pradesh, pressing in from the west, south, and east. It sits in the northern and eastern hemispheres, a sliver of vertical geography barely 300 kilometers across, where altitude changes faster than opinion. But if you only see it as the country that invented gross national happiness, a slogan repeated in 1,000 headlines, you will miss the actual texture of the place. The chili fields drying on tin roofs, the archers heckling each other mid-draw, the grandmothers weaving patterns that take a year to finish, the teenagers rapping in dzong over borrowed beats. This is a nation that measured its own soul before it measured its GDP, and the difference shows in almost everything. Morning in Thimphu does not arrive with a subway rumble or a wall of neon. It arrives with the low murmur of prayer wheels turning outside dzong, the fortress monastery that houses both the throne room and the government offices, a fusion of church and state under one whitewashed roof. Thimphu is the only national capital on Earth without a single traffic light. A white-gloved officer once stood at the main intersection directing cars by hand, and even now that the city has grown past 115,000 people, the instinct toward restraint has never fully left. Compare this to Singapore, where glass towers compete for altitude, or to Kathmandu, just a mountain range away, choked with motorbike exhaust and unregulated sprawl. Thimphu chose a different tempo on purpose. It is the political and economic center of the kingdom, yet agriculture and livestock remain a large share of Bhutan's overall GDP and employment, an oddity for a modernizing economy. Civil servants in pressed gos walk past archery grounds where office workers loose arrows on their lunch break. Prayer flags strung along the ridgelines snap in the wind above the same rooftops where satellite dishes catch English Premier League matches. Down in the weekend market along the Wangchu, vendors from outlying villages haul in sacks of dried chilies and wheels of homemade cheese before dawn, setting up stalls that will be picked clean by noon. Thimphu does not have its own airport. Every flight in or out lands 50 kilometers away in Paro, funneled through a single mountain-ringed runway considered one of the most technically demanding approaches for any commercial pilot on Earth, which means the capital's connection to the rest of the planet has always run through someone else's valley first. The tension is not staged for cameras. It is simply how the city breathes. Leave the capital behind and climb east, and the road eventually opens into the wide glacial valley of Bumthang, the spiritual and agricultural heart of central Bhutan. Here, the pace slows to the rhythm of harvest. Buckwheat is the valley's signature crop, ground into flour for coolie pancakes and puta noodles because the altitude is too harsh for rice to ripen reliably. Apple orchards, introduced by Swiss development workers in the 1960s, now blanket the hillsides beside older fields of barley, and Bumthang's dairies produce some of the country's best-known cheese, a legacy of that same Swiss partnership. Farmhouses here are built the old way, rammed earth and timber, painted with protective symbols under the eaves, phalluses and dragons meant to ward off gossip and misfortune rather than to shock the tourists who photograph them. The journey west and south drops in elevation until the road follows the Mochu and Fochu rivers down into Punakha, the valley where the two rivers physically meet beneath the whitewashed walls of Punakha dzong. There is no coastline in Bhutan, no fishing fleet waiting on a tide, but there is a river culture all its own. Anglers here pursue golden mahseer and brown trout in permitted stretches of the Mo-Chu, and farmers time their rice transplanting to the river's seasonal swell, the way a coastal village times its nets to the moon. Every February or March, Punakha hosts the Drubchen, a festival that reenacts a 17th century battle against invading Tibetan forces, local men dressed as warriors performing mock combat with swords and shields in a ritual called the Pazap, followed within days by the Punakha Chechu itself, one of the 3 largest festivals in western Bhutan. Where the sea shapes a coastal town's memory, the river shapes Punakhas, carrying both irrigation and history downstream together. Family in Bhutan rarely means one generation under one roof. Grandparents, parents, and children often share the same farmhouse, and inheritance in many Bhutanese communities passes matrilineally, with land and home typically going to daughters rather than sons, an arrangement that quietly reshapes who holds authority around the dinner table. Villages are organized into giwogs, clusters of hamlets, bound by shared irrigation channels and shared obligation. And when someone needs a new roof or a harvest brought in before the frost, neighbors show up without being paid, a practice called japto, literally an offering of service. It is the same instinct that, in recent years, has drawn thousands of ordinary citizens to volunteer their labor-building infrastructure for the new Galefu project in the south, working weekend shifts alongside members of parliament. In town, the weekly market is not simply a place to buy chilies and cheese. It is where marriage proposals get whispered, and where news travels faster than any newspaper could carry it. Nowhere does Bhutan reveal itself more honestly than at the table, and nowhere does the tension between comfort and fire run hotter. Bhutanese cuisine draws on Tibetan, Indian, and Chinese influences, but it filters all of them through 2 obsessions: chili and cheese. Emadachi, a stew of green or red chilies simmered in a soft, tangy cheese made from yak or cow milk, is treated less as a garnish than as the meal's entire spine, and it is widely regarded as the national dish. Kewadachi swaps in potatoes for a milder cousin, while shamudachi uses local mushrooms instead. Fakshapa layers thin strips of pork, often dried, with whole red chilies and radish or bok choy, simmered until the fat renders into the broth. Jasha maru is a rustic chicken stew thickened with tomato, ginger, and coriander, usually served over the valley's signature red rice, an unpolished, faintly nutty grain that anchors nearly every plate in the country. Momos, steamed dumplings filled with pork, beef, or cheese and dipped in a fiery Ize chili paste, migrated in from Tibet generations ago and are now sold hot off the steamer at roadside stalls. Zhao Shungo turns whatever vegetables are in season into a simple stir-fry, and kurle, a buckwheat pancake, shows up wherever rice won't grow. Wash it all down with suja, salted butter tea, churned from yak butter, or with ara, a home-distilled spirit made from rice, maize, or millet, poured generously at any gathering worth attending. Working people eat cheaply at small roadside canteens, informal eateries with a few plastic chairs, and a pot of imadachi kept simmering all day. No menu necessary because everyone already knows what's cooking. But if there is one dish that carries the emotional weight of the whole country, it is the Sunday pot of emadachi shared among a full house. Chilies from the family's own garden, cheese made by a neighbor, red rice steaming beside it, the kind of meal that measures a family's week rather than just feeding it. And if there is one product that carries Bhutan's name into the wider world, it is not a spice or a wine, but Bhutanese honey and high-altitude red rice, now exported in small, carefully branded batches as the country leans into premium, low-volume agriculture the same way it leans into low-volume tourism. Officially, Bhutan speaks dzong, a Tibeto-Burman language written in the same script as Classical Tibetan, but dzong is only the government's language, not the whole country's. In the east, most people speak Changla, often called Shachopka, the tongue of the Shachop, believed to be the earliest settlers of the land, now called Bhutan. In the south, Lhotshamka, a dialect of Nepali, is spoken by the Lhotshampa, ethnic Nepali communities whose ancestors migrated into southern Bhutan beginning in the 19th century. Beyond these three broad groups, geographic isolation carved out nearly 20 distinct dialects across the kingdom's valleys, some spoken by only a few thousand people. Born from centuries of villages, separated by passes too high to cross in winter. English, inherited from the country's modern schooling system, functions as the working language of instruction and government business, so that a single Bhutanese civil servant might move between 3 or 4 languages before lunch. Far to the northwest, near the Tibetan border, live the Layap, a small, semi-nomadic community of yak herders who occupy some of the highest permanently inhabited settlements on the planet, above 4,000 meters in the Laya region of Gasa district. Layap women are known for a distinctive conical bamboo hat called a belo, adorned with beads and cane rings, an unmistakable marker of a people who spend most of the year isolated from the rest of the country by snow. Their traditional wealth is measured in yaks, and their craft is built around wool, felted and woven into everything from tents to clothing suited to life above the tree line. Climate change now threatens that entire economy. Warming temperatures at altitude are shrinking traditional pasture, shifting snowmelt patterns, and pushing herding families to reconsider a way of life that predates the modern Bhutanese state itself. Layap communities also face pressure from limited land rights and the slow pull of younger generations toward towns and easier work. Further east, in the remote Merak and Sakteng valleys near the Indian border, live the Brokpa, another semi-nomadic herding people distinguished by their striking headgear, a felted spider-like hat called a tsipi cham, woven with 5 long tapering points, designed specifically to shed mountain rain off the wearer's face and shoulders. The Brokpa herd yaks and sheep and pass down their history through oral storytelling rather than written record, elders reciting genealogies and migration routes to children who will one day recite them to their own. Tourism has only recently begun reaching Sakteng, a valley that remained officially closed to outside visitors until around 2010, and that same accessibility now presents its own quiet threat. As roads improve and homestays multiply, the very isolation that preserved Brokpa customs for centuries is beginning to erode from the inside out. Ask most visitors to name Bhutan's most iconic image, and they will likely describe Paro Taktsang, the Tiger's Nest Monastery clinging to a cliff face above the Paro Valley, and it is a genuine marvel of 17th century engineering and faith. But locals will just as often point instead to the Geo and Kira, the national dress that every Bhutanese citizen is required to wear in schools, offices, and formal settings. Men wear the go, a knee-length robe cinched at the waist with a woven belt called a kira, forming a deep front pouch once used to carry a bowl, coins, or even a small dagger. Women wear the kira, a rectangular length of woven cloth, wrapped around the body and fastened at both shoulders with silver brooches called koma, worn over a blouse called a wonju. Both garments were formalized in the 17th century by Zhabdrung Ngawang Namgyal, the Lama who first unified Bhutan, specifically to give the Bhutanese people a visual identity distinct from Tibet. So while the tiger's nest draws the cameras, it is the go and kira worn on a Tuesday morning by a school teacher or a bank clerk that Bhutanese people would tell you actually defines them. Bhutan's musical identity splits cleanly along the same modern versus traditional fault line as everything else here. Jungdra, a slow, ornamented style of court and folk singing, and Boedra, its livelier cousin often accompanied by group dance, are performed to the plucked, banjo-like drone of the dramnyan, a long-necked lute alongside the lingam, a bamboo flute, and the piwang, a two-stringed fiddle. These older forms are considered classical repertoire, taught formally and performed at festivals and royal occasions. Set against them is rigsa, a modern popular genre, blending Bhutanese melody with Hindi film music and Western pop production, blasted from car stereos in Thimphu and streamed by teenagers who have never sat through a full Jungdra performance. Bhutan's musical traditions, including Buddhist ritual chanting and horn music with deep resonant dungchen trumpets and hand cymbals used in monastic ceremonies, have been noted by ethnomusicologists as part of the broader Himalayan soundscapes that influenced some Western minimalist and ambient composers. Contemporary Bhutanese artists like Sonam Dorji and groups blending rigsa with hip-hop have pushed the country's music further onto regional streaming platforms, carrying dramnyan tones into beats built on laptops rather than lutes. Bhutan's religious calendar orbits around the 10th day of the lunar month, the day associated with the birth of Guru Rinpoche, the 8th century master credited with bringing Buddhism into the Himalayas, and it is this date that gives the Chechu festivals their name. The Paro Chechu, held each spring in the courtyard of Paro Dzong, just as the valley's rhododendrons bloom, culminates in the unfurling of a massive appliqued thanka called a thongdrol, believed to cleanse the sins of anyone who simply lays eyes on it. Masked charm dances performed by monks and laymen reenact stories of demons subdued and enlightenment won. Worn costumes and skull-faced masks moving in slow, deliberate rotation to drum and horn. In Bumthang, the Jambe Lakhang Drup adds a stranger, more visceral spectacle, the Muang Fire Dance, in which participants run through flaming arches as an act of ritual purification, drawing crowds from across the country every autumn. These are not staged performances for outsiders. They are, first and foremost, spiritual obligations that happen to be extraordinary to watch. Ecologically, Bhutan occupies one of the most compressed, vertical worlds on the planet, plunging from subtropical lowlands near 200 meters above sea level to Himalayan peaks over 7,000 meters, within a horizontal distance of barely 150 kilometers, a gradient that packs an outsized share of the world's biodiversity into a small footprint. Jigme Dorji National Park, the country's second-largest protected area, spans all three of Bhutan's climate zones and shelters snow leopards, Bengal tigers, red pandas, and the takin, Bhutan's peculiar national animal, a goat antelope with the stocky build of a bison that legend says was conjured whole from a goat's head and a cow's skeleton by a wandering 15th century saint. Royal Manas National Park, straddling the southern border with India, protects some of the last stretches of lowland subtropical forest left in the Eastern Himalayas, home to elephants, clouded leopards, and hornbills. Further north, the Phobjika Valley hosts one of the world's few wintering grounds for the endangered black-necked crane, birds that migrate down from the Tibetan Plateau each November and are honored with their own festival at Gangti Monastery, complete with children dressed as cranes performing dances meant to welcome them home. Even so, Bhutan's environment faces genuine strain. Glacial retreat is destabilizing high-altitude lakes, prone to catastrophic outburst floods, illegal encroachment threatens forest buffer zones, and the country's own hydropower ambitions, its single largest export earner, require damming the very rivers its ecosystems depend on. Bhutan's recorded history stretches back to roughly 2000 BCE, but its modern shape was forged in the 17th century when the Tibetan Lama Zhabdrung Ngawang Namgyal fled political rivals in Tibet, unified Bhutan's fractious valleys under a single dual system of religious and civil authority, and built the great dzong fortresses that still anchor every district today. That system eventually fractured into infighting, and in 1907, a council of monks, officials, and regional leaders elected Ugyen Wangchuck, the powerful governor of Trongsa, as Bhutan's first hereditary king, founding the Wangchuck dynasty that still reigns. Bhutan's most nation-defining modern transformation, though, was not a war or a revolution, but a voluntary one. In 2006, the fourth king abdicated in favor of his son and set in motion the drafting of a constitution. And in 2008, Bhutan peacefully converted itself from an absolute monarchy into a parliamentary democracy, a transition initiated from the throne rather than forced from the streets. Behind the roads, dzongs, and irrigation channels that stitched the country together, though, sits a labor history rarely mentioned in the brochures. For centuries, ordinary Bhutanese households were bound to wula, a compulsory unpaid labor tax used to build temples, roads, and fortresses, a system only formally wound down in the 2000s. When the Indo-Bhutan National Highway was finally cut through the Himalayas and opened in 1968, connecting Thimphu to the Indian border town of Phuntsholing, it was built substantially with the muscle of Indian and Nepali laborers, working with hand tools along cliff faces, a workforce whose names rarely appear in the history books that celebrate the road itself. Bhutan's economy today runs on a genuine paradox. Hydropower, sold almost entirely to India, is the country's single largest source of revenue and the backbone of its modern GDP, generated by massive dams harnessing the same glacial rivers that farmers downstream still use to flood their rice terraces by hand. Tourism follows a similarly engineered logic, a high-value, low-volume policy that charges visitors a sustainable development fee and deliberately caps numbers rather than chasing mass arrivals, a strategy virtually unheard of anywhere else in South Asia. And yet underneath both of those modern industries sits a much older, informal economy that never went anywhere. Farmers still trade surplus chilies at the weekend market, small family-run shops still extend credit to regular customers on a handshake, and roughly half the population still works the land in some capacity. A hydropower engineer and a subsistence farmer might be brothers in the same family, one salary paid in Bhutanese ngultrum wired to a bank app, the other paid in barley sacks stacked in a barn. In the south, near Galefu, the government has broken ground on an ambitious new special administrative region envisioned as a hub for finance, education, and sustainable industry, a bet on a second economic pillar to sit alongside hydropower and tourism, built in part by the same Jabtog volunteer labor that once raised village temples. The contrasts pile up quickly once you start looking for them. A monk in maroon robes scrolls a smartphone outside a 15th century monastery. A farmer drives a rattling tractor past a stone chorten built before tractors existed anywhere on Earth. Prayer flags share a hillside with cell towers. Teenagers in school-mandated GHO and Kira compare sneaker brands at recess. A grandmother weaves a Kishuthara textile in Luense using a technique passed down for centuries, while her granddaughter photographs the finished cloth for an online shop. Bhutanese youth today study everything from hospitality management to computer engineering, many heading abroad to Australia or India for university, and a striking number simply do not return, a trend officials have openly worried over as the country loses skilled young workers to what's often called brain drain. Social media reaches Bhutan's cities as thoroughly as it reaches anywhere else, and Rigsar musicians now build followings on platforms that did not exist a generation ago. But the pull toward family land, toward the archery ground on a Saturday, toward the GHO hanging pressed in the closet for Losar, has not disappeared. It has just started competing with a phone screen for the first time in Bhutanese history. The genuine challenges are not hidden. Rural to urban migration is emptying some highland villages of their working-age population. Youth unemployment remains a persistent government concern. Even as the broader economy grows, climate change threatens both glacial water supply and high-altitude farming, and the country must constantly weigh how much tourism, technology, and foreign investment it can absorb without diluting the very culture that makes it distinct in the first place. So why do people stay in a country this remote, this mountainous, this economically modest by global standards? Ask a dozen Bhutanese, and you will get a dozen different lists, but certain names recur. Family, always family. The grandmother stirring emadachi on a wood stove, the smell of red rice steaming through an open kitchen window. The language, whichever one it happens to be, dzongka or changla or lotchamka, carrying jokes that don't survive translation. The festivals, the archery matches, the particular blue of a poppy blooming above the tree line in a place almost nobody outside will ever see. People stay because Bhutan never asked them to choose between the modern world and their own soil. It simply asked them to hold both at once. A country is not made happy by a slogan stamped on its tourism ministry. It is made happy slowly, imperfectly, by a grandmother's cheese, a neighbor's unpaid labor, and a mountain that has never once let anyone forget how small they truly are. Thank you for staying with us through this journey into Bhutan's hidden folds, past the postcard cliffs and into the kitchens, rivers, and festival grounds where the country actually lives. If this look at Bhutan's overlooked soul moved you the way it moved us while making it, consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because there are dozens more misunderstood corners of the world waiting for the same kind of attention. We'll see you on the next journey.